You've seen your dog do it, that frantic, confused bark at the hallway mirror. To you, it's a funny glitch, a sign that your best friend isn't quite as smart as they look. You assume that because they don't recognize the reflection as themselves, there must be no one in there looking back. We have been taught for decades that self awareness is a high tech human upgrade, a spark of light that the rest of the animal kingdom simply never received. We treat the mirror as the ultimate judge of a soul, a barrier that separates the people from the things. But science is starting to realize that the mirror didn't fail the dog, the test did. We have been looking for the self using only our own eyes, while the rest of the world has been finding it through their noses, their skin, and their thoughts. The question isn't whether animals know they exist, it's whether we are smart enough to recognize when they tell us they do. For nearly 50 years, our understanding of animal consciousness was dominated by a single, elegant experiment. In 1970, a psychologist named Gordon Gallup Jr. developed the mirror self-recognition test. He took a group of chimpanzees and, while they were anesthetized, he placed a small dot of red dye on their brow, a spot they couldn't see without a reflection. When the chimps woke up and looked into a mirror, they didn't bark at a stranger. They didn't try to play with a new friend. Instead, they reached up and touched the red dot on their own faces. In that single gesture, the chimp was saying something profound. That isn't another animal. That is me. This was the birth of the threshold. For decades, the mirror was the wall. If an animal passed, like orangutans or dolphins, they were invited into the club of the conscious. If they failed, like dogs, cats, and almost every other creature on Earth, they were dismissed as biological machines. Complex, perhaps, but ultimately empty inside. We use the mirror as a way to justify our dominance, a way to say that I think, vive, I am, was a uniquely human privilege. But the more we looked, the more we realized that the mirror is a very specific kind of tool. It only tests for a visual self, a sense of identity built entirely on sight. And in the animal kingdom, sight is often the least important way to know who you are. Consider the dog. A dog lives in a world of scent, a smellscape where every object has a chemical history and every person has a unique olfactory signature. To a dog, a mirror is a baffling, broken piece of reality. It looks like a dog, but it has no smell. It has no texture. It doesn't breathe. To a dog, the reflection in the hallway isn't a self because it's missing 90% of the information that defines a living thing. When your dog barks at the mirror, they aren't being dumb. They are reacting to a sensory ghost, a visual lie that their much more powerful nose tells them isn't real. In 2017, researcher Alexandra Horowitz decided to stop asking dogs to be humans and started asking them to be dogs. She developed the olfactory mirror test. She presented dogs with canisters of their own urine, their scent self, but she added a tiny, invisible modification to some of them. Just as Gallup had used a red dot for the eyes, Horowitz used an extra scent for the nose. The results were immediate. The dogs spent significantly more time investigating the modified canisters. They recognized their own scent shadow, and they knew when it had been tampered with. They knew who they were. They just didn't need a piece of glass to prove it. The dog's I am doesn't live in the eyes. It lives in the air. If the mirror test was biased against smell, it was also biased against brain size. We assumed that self-awareness was the result of millions of years of primate evolution, a luxury that required a massive, wrinkled neocortex. But in 2019, a tiny fish called the blue streak cleaner rasa shattered that assumption. This fish is about the size of your finger, with a brain the size of a pea. Researchers placed a tiny brown mark on the fish's throat, a spot it could only see in a mirror placed against the glass of its tank. When the fish saw the mark, it didn't attack the reflection. It swam down to the bottom of the tank and scraped its throat against the sand, trying to clean the mark off. Then, it swam back to the mirror to check if it was gone. The implications of this were seismic. If a fish with a microscopic brain can recognize itself in a mirror, then self-awareness isn't a rare, late-stage evolutionary miracle. It might be a fundamental property of life. It might be that self isn't a high-tech computer program, but a basic survival tool. After all, if you are an animal moving through a dangerous world, you have to know where you end and the rest of the world begins. You have to know that the fin being bitten is yours. You have to know that the shadow you're casting is your own. The mirror isn't a test of a soul. It's just a test of whether an animal happens to prioritize the same sensory data that we do. This brings us to the deeper level of existence, metacognition. This is the ability to think about your own thinking, to monitor the contents of your own mind. It is the difference between simply knowing something and knowing that you know it. For a long time, we thought this was the final wall, the internal theater that only humans occupied. But when researchers gave rhesus monkeys tasks where they could choose to pass on a difficult question to avoid a penalty, the monkeys showed the same hesitation as humans. They knew when they didn't have the answer. They were monitoring their own uncertainty. They were looking inward, and they were finding a knower behind the eyes. When we look at an Asian elephant standing before a mirror, we see the absolute peak of this internal life. In a famous study at the Bronx Zoo, an elephant named Happy was marked with a large white X on her forehead. Happy didn't just touch the mark. She spent hours using the mirror to explore parts of her body she had never seen: the inside of her mouth, the underside of her ears. She wasn't just recognizing a self, she was investigating a person. There is a quiet, heavy stillness in the way an elephant looks at itself. It is the look of a creature that has a biography, a creature that remembers its past and perhaps even wonders about its future. And yet, despite all this evidence, we still cling to the idea of our own uniqueness. We use the failures of the mirror test to keep the world at arm's length. We tell ourselves that because a cow or a pig doesn't recognize itself in a reflection, it is just a thing, a resource to be managed, a unit of production. We treat our ignorance as if it were evidence. But what if the self isn't a light switch that is either on or off? What if it is a spectrum, a slow dawn that begins with a fish scraping its throat and ends with a human writing a poem? What if the universe is much more crowded than we've been willing to admit? When you look into the eye of an elephant or even a dog, you are not looking at a biological machine. You are looking at a spectator. There is an observer in there, a center of gravity that is experiencing the world just as you are. They may not have the words for existence, and they may not have a philosophy of the ego, but they are home. They are the ones who are feeling the warmth of the sun, the sting of a mark, and the familiarity of their own scent. To deny them that self-awareness just because they don't use mirrors is like denying that a person can see just because they happen to be wearing a blindfold. The mirror test was never really about the animals. It was about us. It was a way for us to define the other so we could feel more secure in our own identity. We wanted to be the only ones who knew we were here. But the more we break down the walls of our own sensory bias, the more the mirror starts to look like a window. We are realizing that we are not the only ones who are awake. We are part of a vast, shimmering web of selves, a planet teeming with creatures that are all, in their own way, saying, I am. If a magpie can recognize a sticker on its chest, or a fish can check its reflection for parasites, then the human spark is just one part of a much larger fire. We have spent so much time looking for life on other planets, wondering if we are alone in the universe, while we have been surrounded by alien intelligences for our entire history. We are walking through a world of someones, not somethings. And once you realize that, the world becomes a much heavier, more complicated place. You can no longer look at a forest or an ocean as just a collection of resources. You have to see it as a collection of lives, a billion private universes that are all just as real as yours. So, the next time your dog barks at the hallway mirror, don't laugh at their stupidity. Instead, recognize the limitation of your own perspective. The dog isn't failing a test of intelligence. They are rejecting a visual lie. They are waiting for the world to make sense through the senses that actually matter to them. And as they turn away from the glass and go back to sniffing the air, they are doing exactly what you are doing. They are navigating their own reality. They are asserting their own presence. They are existing. We are not the masters of the self. We are just one version of it. The mirror was only ever a wall we built to keep from seeing the truth, that the world is looking back at us with a million different eyes, and every single one of them belongs to someone. The light is on, the house is full, and the someone you've been looking for has been there the entire time. They didn't need a mirror to know they existed. They only needed us to be smart enough to notice.